I spoke at two events last week and I was in Europe earlier this week. And what I found was the questions that I got at the events and also the questions that I got while I was working with the leadership team were all of a similar theme. So I figured a lot of people have that question, so I should just record a podcast. It's the Colin Ellis way. If someone's got a question, I'm like, ooh, I could record a podcast on that. So here we go. And they centered around the evolutionary nature of culture. Now, for those of you who have been following me for a while, you know I talk about the fact that cultures don't change, they evolve. And what I'm going to talk about today kind of reinforces how that happens. And you'll be able to see those different factors that influence culture, not only on a day-to-day, but week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year, this evolutionary nature of culture. One of the statements that I made at one of the events last week was that culture change isn't hard if we teach people how to do it. I've shared this on the podcast before, and it's true. It's true because I've seen it happen. When you teach people how to do it, it becomes much, much easier to do. Of course, there are elements of that culture change that are difficult, usually in dealing with people who have a fixed mindset, who don't want to change. But one of the biggest challenges is getting people to really understand that once you've got to the point where things have changed and you've increased engagement or whatever it is, increased results, whatever the goal of the client is, that's the start. And it's up to then the organization, the team, the manager, the leader to actually keep going. So I just want to talk in today's podcast and in today's video about those three elements. I want to talk about what are those forces that have an impact on culture every single day. Now, I've written about this in a paper. If you're interested in the paper that describes it in detail, maybe you'd like to read about it. If you go to the website, colindellis.com forward, it's the paper that I wrote about executives and helping them to understand. And yet what I found is there's a real curiosity, particularly from HR professionals, about this evolutionary nature of culture. And particularly with the world as it is at the moment. And that was one of the questions that I had, is given the politics of the world right now, how does that have an impact on culture? Now, I want to make it clear, this is not a podcast about politics, but I am interested in those factors that have an impact on the way that we work. And so, for example, a great example would be of that would be diversity, equity, and inclusion, so DEI policies, and you know, kind of the view of that in the United States in the current administration and how that's affecting working culture. Again, it's not my job to comment really on whether that's right or wrong. It just is the decision that they've made because that's the political party in power. But it's to understand, well, what is that dynamic? But that's just one example. Obviously, we have global conflicts all of the time. And all of these have an impact on our working culture. So those three elements that impact culture day to day. The first one is social culture. Now, this is largely driven by where the organization is based in the world, largely driven by that. So if you are a UK company or you've got certain habits, traditions, rituals, there are things that you do in the UK that you don't do. You know, everything revolves around tea in the UK usually. Same for India, same for Australia, you know, same for South America, all of these, you know, same for Africa. All of these different countries have different social cultures. And so this is the study of anthropology that talks about how different cultures kind of are built and the characteristics of those cultures. Now, that's a very easy thing to say. You're like, of course, we're a team, we're based in the UK, this is the way we do things. But actually, the way that you do things and the things that you say in the south of England might be different to the north. So there's kind of a different social culture there. Certainly, as a younger employee and obviously from my accent being from the north of England, every time I would come south, it felt different. I know I used to joke all the time, how do you spot a northerner on the tube? They talk to you. So it's different things like that, right? Different social cultures. However, when you consider kind of globalization, we've been going through a period of globalization. We have lots of multinational companies. We have a global workforce, and really the hybrid working has opened the door for that a little bit more. It's really important that when we're building cultures, that we recognize that different people are from different backgrounds and different social cultures. I've worked with many large organizations to help them build kind of multicultural teams, and there has to be an appreciation of the difference. I wrote a blog earlier this year. Most companies' approach to multinational workforce is to have a food day, and food days are fine, but it's more than that. It's a lot more than that. It's really taking the time to understand someone's background, their rituals, their habits, all of these kinds of things. And the thing is about social culture, it changes all of the time. Largely, politics is the biggest driver, but then there are big global events that really impact the way that people think about the world. And this is our social culture changes as a result of that. Now, the key drivers of social culture and the change in social culture is the second element, and that's people and personality. Now, what you can't do in a social culture is say everybody from China is the same, everyone from the UK is the same. They're not. And similarly with people and personality, you can't say that every personality, the action personality does this, the people personality does that. However, we have a different mix of people, we have a mix of personalities, and they change all of the time based on their upbringing. Now, we love to put people in boxes, and the box that we use in people and personality is generation, and it's the different generations. One of the things that I incorporate into my management training is to help senior leaders really understand what connects each generation. And each generation is defined by kind of the world events, so the social culture that happens during their formative years as they become teenagers. All right. And so these are the things that unite us. And of course, there are global conflicts. There are different activists and activisms at the time, whether it's civil rights or whether it's Black Lives Matter or whether it's Me Too, these kind of movements that people create that affect the social culture. We have different music, we have different movies, all of these kind of things that we're united by, and I always say, and it's true, so don't anybody challenge me ever that generation is the best generation. It's helpful that I'm Generation X, but we gave you the best music, we gave you the best movies. I know we also gave you social media and the smartphones that have ruined your lives immeasurably, so forgive us that. But it's people that drive change, obviously it is, but you're a product of your upbringing. And so every generational parent tries to do something different based on their own upbringing. So I'll give you an example. My dad had a very poor upbringing, and he wanted to make sure that he could provide more for his family. And he didn't want to treat his own family in the way that he'd been treated. All right. Very different generationally how we treat our children. And so my mum and dad, they treated us differently. And then with our children, we're treating our children differently because we're looking to the past to correct the mistakes. The point that I made when I was working with the leadership team is a real determination of how people's mindsets have changed. When I first got a job in the late 1980s, my dad said, I was lucky to get a job. I was so lucky that the bank had decided to give me work. Now what we're saying to our kids is the organization is so lucky to have you. So it's a real, and again, none of it's right, none of it's wrong, but it's a determination of how things have changed. We encourage our children to be entrepreneurs these days. And yet when I was young, that was just not a thing. Like that was just a special few people became entrepreneurs. But now we have the technology, we have the tools. Also, we have the determination that anyone can be an entrepreneur. So social culture, kind of speaks to politics, what's happening in the world, also where you are. That speaks to, kind of that influence. The second is people and personality. So people change, personalities change. This has an impact on working culture. And the third element is the purpose, vision, and values of the organization. Now, a great example of this is when I first started work, and probably for the first 20 years of my 30 years of work, no organization had a purpose. A purpose wasn't really a thing. Some of them had a vision, some of them that could be bothered. I mean, some didn't even have a strategy, which was lunacy at the time. Some had a 10-year strategy, also lunacy, because immediately out of date. But what organizations stand for changes. It really changes. And the last big shift probably happened post-COVID. The one before that happened post-global financial crisis. All right, and you get this, and then before that, it was probably post 9/11. Post 9/11, even corporate organizations started to think differently about the world. We'd seen this horrific event. What do we need to think about, do differently because we want to see an end to this? global financial crisis, we looked at all these banks going, we're like, we don't want to be those kind of organizations anymore, even though banks still are. But we don't want to be that kind of organization. Also, what we recognize today is there's a limited talent pool. Listen, there's loads of people out there looking for work, but for organization, they're looking for a very specific set of skills. And they recognize finally that culture is the key determinant in that decision-making process. It never used to be, but it is now. Deloitte found that 92% of CEOs now say that culture is the most important thing. And yet only 16% of them said that their culture is where it needs to be right now. So there's an acknowledgement of its importance, but there's still no, kind of real dollars and time being put behind the development of culture. And when it finally catches up for some organizations, it's almost too late because they've lost the people that they really need. So an organization, usually its senior leadership team, usually its board, they really do need to think about what kind of organization do we want to be at this point in time. And yes, you can go on their website now. There's a whole page usually about their culture. Of course, whether they're actually doing it is another question. But there's a page on their culture. This is the purpose, the good we want to do in the world. The vision is an aspirational statement of the future. This is where we're headed. They want people to read it and feel excited. Also, that's a mechanism for making decisions. And then the values. Now, the values are really important because as parents, if you remember People and Personality, we're saying find an organization that values you as a human, that treats you right. We want to see some statements on there that talk to the kind of organization that you are, the kind of emotional principles that you uphold. And those three things then shape the working culture that you build, but only if you do it deliberately. And we have to be thinking about these things all of the time. And this is why some cultures stagnate. There's a lot of people doing the 5 Cultures quiz at the minute, 5culturesquiz.com. Head over there, they're doing the quiz. And, I see a lot of those results and they're either stagnant or pleasant cultures where engagement is low because the culture has just stopped evolving. Once it was good, maybe, or they're making a lot of noise about culture, but they're actually not doing it in the way that they should. It's not evolving. It's not evolving with the times. It's not kind of thinking about what the new generation might be bringing to the party. And also, like the values have been the same for 10 years. There's a great sign that your organization's not really thinking about the evolution of culture when you've had the same value. If you've still got the same values post-COVID, the organization's not really thinking about culture because the world changed post-COVID, and it really did change post-COVID. There should be a new value set. Also, the way that we think about values has changed as well. They're not single words, they're actual statements. So all of these three things combine to make up, if that's the right word, to generate the working culture on a day-to-day basis. And if leadership teams take their eye off the ball of just one of those things, then all of a sudden people don't want to work for them anymore. Reputationally, they tank. They really do. They're not seen as an employer of choice. An employer of choice is one that is in tune with the world. They understand what's going on in the world. They recognize the value that people add and they want to give them agency. And as a company, they say they stand for something. Now, I'll leave you with one example, which happened, I think it was about, I want to say 6 or 7 years ago, which was a company called 37 Signals. 37 Signals, they have a project management tool called Basecamp. What they did, and this was a company, the founders, really good guy. They've written really great books on culture. They take culture seriously. And one of the things that they did on their internal communication platforms was ban all talk of politics. It actually might have been the Trump-Biden presidential race. That might have been it. So it might have been 2020. So they banned all talk of it. Now, on the one hand, what they were saying is we're seeing this huge division in the social culture, right? That's that first element. We're seeing huge division. We don't want that to play into our working culture. But the people that they'd hired, lots of millennials, actually, they've been told that they have a voice and they have an opinion and they should share it, right? And as their parents, that's what we said. You have an opinion, you have a voice. It's up to you to air that opinion, get the challenge, get to a point where you have empathy and you have understanding and compassion for the other side. So there's that. And then there was their vision, their values, their purpose. And a big part of their values was around free speech. And so the employees rightly challenged the organization and they said, hang on a minute, this is not what you stand for. Also, the way to address division is to talk, is to understand, is to build bridges. It's not to ban talk of it altogether. Now, of course, if the organization didn't have it as a value around free speech and about giving people autonomy and agency, there'd be less to really argue about, but they did. And they ended up losing 1/3 of their workforce. There was a massive climb down from the senior leaders. Senior leaders were Jason Fried and David Hannemeyer Hansen. And they wrote this really great letter. Like I said, there's a lot to admire from their culture. It's not that I agree or disagree with their stance. That was their decision to make for their business. I'm not in a position to judge that. But they, and you should seek it out. I wrote about it in Detox Your Culture. They actually put out a letter and basically said, we got it wrong. And that was a real sign that the world had changed. The way that we thought about culture had changed. And that was right before COVID. And then, of course, COVID changed it again. Is people want agency, people want autonomy, and people want to be part of the evolutionary nature of the way that we get work done. Okay, hope you've enjoyed today's show.